welcome Michael as the Managing Director of CBRE's Columbus office and all of its operations here. In his role, he is responsible for more than 275 real estate sales and support professionals throughout Central Ohio. And the Columbus office provides services such as asset services, brokerage services, capital markets, occupier outsourcing, project management, and valuation and advisory services. In 2015, CBRE Columbus arranged over $1.3 billion in sale and transactions. Mike is active in the Columbus community, volunteering with Meals on Wheels and serving as the chair of the Columbus Realtors Commercial Education Committee, as well as the organization's Commercial Advisory Board. He also is active with COSI on the Young Professionals Board, and he is a graduate of the State University of New York at Fredonia. Or is he? Because what I heard, rumor or not, that his mother never saw him graduate and doesn't believe him. And additionally, when he applied for his real estate license, apparently they didn't believe him either, and he had to go find his diploma to get his real estate license. Not sure there's a story there or not. I'm sure you'll tell us all about it, Michael. But it even gets better. So Michael gets married a few years ago, and I wasn't there, but the story is told that when the announcer, band guy or DJ or whatever, went to announce Mr. and Mrs. Copella, he accidentally said Mr. and Mrs. Huber, which is his wife's maiden name. And I just think the irony of who really wears the pants in the family comes into play there somehow. So help me welcome Michael Copella to Columbus Rotary.
I'm Mike Copella. I'm the Managing Director of CBRE Columbus. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We're going to talk about 5 major real estate trends, the why behind the trends, and then how they're impacting Columbus. And so the first trend is the global flow of capital into the United States. The second is the war for talent and how that's impacting real estate. And then 3 is this kind of increase in instant gratification for the consumer. 4 is the rise of mixed-use development. And then 5, how they all kind of are flowing into this downtown momentum that is really benefiting places like Columbus and a lot of other secondary markets. So like Michael talked about, CBRE is the largest real estate consultant in the world. We have about 70,000 employees, about 275 here in Columbus. And I'm proud to say that we were ranked the 15th best company to work for in 2015 by Forbes. So that's kind of a fun fact. Michael touched on, we do our 5 major business lines are brokerage, which is leasing and sale of properties, property management. We also do project management, which is overseeing construction projects. And then we have 10 appraisers, so we're in the valuation business. And then we also raise and secure capital for our clients when they're looking to invest in projects. So moving on to the first trend is really kind of at historic levels for both the amount of activity and then really by the amount of foreign investment. And so looking at last year, 2015, actually Canada was the largest foreign investor in the United States, mostly due to some changes around their currency. And then this year, it's really all been about China. And so why are they choosing the United States? They're choosing the United States for a couple different reasons. The first is the foreign investor views the economy here as stable and still growing. And then they look at the political environment and they see it as stable and a little bit predictable. I know this year has been a little different, but in the same sense, when you compare it to a global scale, they still feel like there's a little bit more predictability with our political environment than the rest of the world. And in addition to that, so why we've also seen increased capital coming into the United States is Brexit. And so if you remember when England chose to leave the European Union, one of the things that impacted was how investors viewed London. For a long time, London was seen as maybe the kind of the cream of the crop when it came to certainly office properties and trophy office properties. With the vote to leave the EU, that's going to provide for some instability for the next couple of years. So we have seen investors that normally would pursue properties in London or in England, and they're now looking at the United States. So again, United States is seen as favorable because a stable economy, growing, there's still growth here, favorable political environment, and things like Brexit are causing more uncertainty out in the market. So what are they buying? The foreign investor loves trophy products, so they love Class A office downtown and places like Chicago and California and New York City, so they compete really heavily for those. And then in addition to that, they love multifamily, mostly because multifamily allows for them to have some diversification within that. It's a fairly stable investment, so they'll look for multifamily in, I'd say, like areas that have high barriers of entry. Same thing, they're looking for trophy type product. So the impact on Columbus is that the foreign investment, when it goes into places like California or Chicago or New York City, it's pricing out the national investor, the people that would play in those markets all the time. And so they can't get the yield that they've been looking for. They don't like the returns. They don't like the investment. So they're looking at secondary markets. And so they're looking at St. Louis, Kansas City, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus. And they love the fundamentals here in Columbus. So we're seeing a lot of first-time investors here, or people that maybe have invested previously and are coming back. They really like the story of Columbus. And so the good news for that is that we're seeing kind of competition for trophy deals. We're seeing historical highs for certain products. And the type of products that they like to be purchasing or like to own here in Columbus is really the Class A industrial assets. So some of the distribution facilities in Rickenbacker are seen as trophy assets. And then we've seen just unprecedented, I'd say demand for some of our Class A multifamily. Next trend is this war for talent. So for those of you that run or own a business, you certainly understand that talent is something that probably keeps you up at night. I know it does for me. But what's changed here is how the war for talent is impacting real estate. So a lot of our clients that are large occupiers and employ a lot of people are telling us that they feel like they are in an environment of where the employee is interviewing the employer. Why should I work for you? And that's impacting real estate mostly because these companies are having to think about the real estate in a very different fashion. And in the same sense, companies are looking at the real estate not necessarily from a cost standpoint, but more about how can they access new markets and how can they access a potential employee. So when they're looking at making a decision about their real estate, one of the most important things is where is the talent. So real estate cost is actually a little bit lower on the totem pole when they rank things that are important for them when they look for locations. And the most important thing actually is where does the talent look? Where does the talent reside? So here in Columbus, certainly when we see companies that are looking around, they'll look for where they think their talent demographic is, be it downtown or the Arena District, or if it's an industrial group, they might be looking out east or in Rickenbacker. Excuse me, but the identification of talent is probably the most important thing in these occupiers' minds. Once they've identified where the talent is, they look to create strategies that are attract the talent. So they create really stimulating floor plates. They create floor plates that are very efficient, so they can basically put more people in the space. And they also look for locations that have a lot of amenities, because those amenities are they feel like attract new talent and help them retain the talent that they have. And so how does this impact Columbus? And so the impact in Columbus is that we are seeing companies look at real estate in a completely different fashion, where they aren't necessarily looking at cost first. They're looking at location and what that allows them to do from a talent standpoint. So an example certainly would be Nationwide Insurance looking at consolidating people in Dublin and other markets and moving it all into Grandview Yard, which is a mixed-use environment. And so in their mind, they look at the story that they can tell by being in a mixed-use environment that has good access, amenities, and then really creating a real estate strategy around being the employer of choice. And so other companies have done that. Certainly EY, Plant Moran, CBRE has done it as well. We moved into our new space about 90 days ago. Resource, Amirati, those are all groups that look at real estate in a very distinct fashion to say, we're going to use our real estate to allow us to compete for the best talent out there. We're seeing wellness initiatives, so height adjustable desks. We're seeing companies that are taking vending machines out of their space and introducing healthy snacks. We're seeing different standards for air quality. I think the one standard across the board that everybody's doing is just loading up the space with tons of technology, which allows people to work in all different forms and fashions. So the third trend is this rise on, kind of this consumer's expectations for instant gratification. And I think we can all remember that it used to be 2 to 3 day shipping, and then it was, next day, and then it was 2 to 3 hours. Now it's within an hour. And I think you also, if you look around and the people that have used Uber in this room, you can just push a button and you can basically get your product right there on demand. And so how that is impacting real estate is that retailers and distribution companies are having to really meet or exceed the demands of the consumer. And because of that, they're looking at moving closer and closer to their consumer. And Columbus has kind of two unique things going on for it. One, on the first hand, is it's an excellent consumer pool, right? So it's the 15th largest city, about 2 million people. You have basically a group of people that consumers that a retailer just wants to sell its product to, and then you have these fundamentals here that make it really great for distribution. And so the things that make it really great for distribution is you have 2 international airports, you have intermodal, you have a great access with 70 and 71, you have a very talented workforce, you have low overall real estate costs. So these distribution companies are looking at Columbus and saying, hey, not only can we get closer to our consumer, but we can also look to be a place where we can access basically 48% of the population with a 1-hour drive. So how that's impacting Columbus is that basically our vacancy rate is about 6.1% for industrial real estate, which is actually a little bit higher than it's been in 2014 and 2015, but mostly because there's been about 4 million square feet of speculative development. So that's a great sign in how strong the industrial market is here. And we're seeing that strength translate into higher lease rates. And so higher lease rates mean more investment. They mean more foreign investment coming in. It means more overall production. It's just a great sign for the health of the overall industrial market. The fourth largest trend that we're seeing is just this move towards mixed use. And so, what is a mixed use development? Mixed use development would be a development that's going to have a retail component, a multifamily component, and an office component. And there's lots of reasons why this is successful. I think that if you go back to the war on talent, the tenants or occupiers are looking for space that allows them to tell a story, that allows them to have those amenities. So when they're out looking in the market, they don't necessarily want to go just to an office park. They want to go to an office park that has a Starbucks, a craft beer brewery, a great hot restaurant that they can talk about and say, hey, this is one of the reasons you should come work here. In addition, the developers really like it too because it's a diversification of who they're going to be going after. And the lenders like it as well, mostly because multifamilies has seemed to be a very stable and safe place for them to make their investment. And most lenders don't want to do speculative office. So you're seeing kind of this, this ideas coming together to do a mixed use development. Works for both the end user and also the developers. So some examples of mixed use development. I think really probably every 3 days we see a new mixed use development pop up in the Shore North. But some of the other ones that have been really popular have been some of the ones that Daimler and Kaufman have done. And so we think really one of the keynote ones is 250 South High, which Daimler and Kaufman did. That's actually 100% occupied. It was almost 100% occupied before it was opened. They're getting really kind of groundbreaking rents for some of the top floors for the multifamily component of it, and it did so well that it's pushing 225 South High out of the ground. And so that's going to be an opportunity for another mixed-use development right on Columbus Commons. Other examples of that are going to be 500 West Broad Street. So another, that's a Kaufman product. That's going to be kind of the, keynote one for in Franklinton. Same thing, it'll be multifamily, retail, and then office, and I believe anticipated in 2018. What is very interesting is that you're also seeing this mixed-use component being done in the suburbs. So I think we're probably familiar with what Dublin is doing with the Bridge Park. We're also seeing it in New Albany with their Market and Main. We're seeing it in Westerville. We're seeing it up in Polaris with Polaris Point. And what's interesting about that is that, one, I think it's a great move on their part to create a stimulating project to meet the demands of the consumer. But it's also a defensive mechanism, which we can talk about in a second. It's really, in my mind, to stop the flight of companies and residences to downtown. And so they need to have an opportunity to create, this mixed-use environment that, the millennial crowd or this new workforce seems interesting. So that seems interesting. So it's been fun watching these things come up out of the ground. And again, we think it's a little bit of a defensive mechanism. So this all builds towards the downtown momentum, and this is a trend that we have seen really all across the country. All the secondary markets are really seeing this resurgence. I think Columbus it's been a fantastic story, and if you look at the war on talent, the mixed use, consumerism, all these things are really kind of pointing towards everything heading towards downtown. Some of that has to do with the fact that infrastructure is already here. You already have some of the residences already here. You already have some of the amenities, so people are just able to build on that. How this downtown momentum is affecting Columbus real estate is there's been multiple mixed-use projects announced. There's going to be more in the future. That's just, a product that it seems like the consumer really wants. And then in addition to that, from a rental rate standpoint and a vacancy standpoint, the vacancy has actually gone down by about 2 points in less than a year, which is a really tremendous swing. And I would say that most of our tenant clients are feeling like that they're settling for office space. So when they're out looking in the market, they don't really feel like that their needs are being met. As we saw with Daimler's project at 250 South High, that was 100% leased before it was really opened. So we think that because of that, vacancy is going to continue to go down. We'll probably see a couple more projects be announced. Really the backbone of this downtown momentum is just the residential. And so as it sits today, we have about just under 8,000 people living in downtown. We anticipate that to be about 10,000 in 2018. So really just tremendous growth. A couple big numbers pop out there, which is about 42% of that population is the millennial generation, so 21 to 34. And then the multifamily owners are enjoying a 97% occupancy rate, which is fantastic, and we'll talk about that a little more in a second. We feel like retail probably is lagging behind a little bit compared to the growth we've seen in office and the growth we've seen in multifamily, but we also feel like there's been some pretty fun and exciting announcements. Pins Mechanical, which is the bowling alley on 4th, I think that's a pretty cool thing for downtown. There's been countless craft breweries. We kind of see those as like the taverns of today. There's been a lot of restaurants that have popped up in different areas that are the new areas, let's say like River South and Old Town East. And then, you saw Target come into not necessarily downtown, but is going to go closer to the campus and do really kind of a downtown retail. So we think that as office and residential grows, we'll see more retail. But it's one of those things where we need to have the bodies for really to see some big pops. All right, so talking about one of the negative things that has happened with this downtown momentum and this downtown focus has certainly been the challenge around parking. And in all reality, there's been tremendous demand and really no increase in supply. In fact, there's even been, as we know, the garage near AP closed. There was 700 spots that were taken off the market. So overall, we've seen a really dramatic increase in parking costs. And if you're looking at that right there, the average reserve spot's about $176. The unreserved spot is about $107, and the surface is about $80. The top of that is $275, and I'm hearing whispers that some parking garages are charging over $300 for the prime reserve spots downtown. So the negative part of that really is that it is keeping some tenants out of the downtown market because they can't really afford to pay for downtown office space and then to park all of their employees, and they're unwilling to pass that cost on to their employee. In addition to that, it's certainly creating some stress on some downtown employers as well as they look to figure out how they, park their employees downtown. It will be interesting to see how this demand is met. We predict that there probably will be some additional parking structures being built. We've also seen that, there's been, CODA has partnered with the city to give free bus passes to certain employees. The smart city, that could be almost a game changer for Columbus with autonomous vehicles. We're able to kind of work those into what our overall infrastructure is. Sitting with large real estate owners and large occupiers of real estate, when they look to develop their kind of master plan for their real estate, they recognize that they need to add parking into their master plan, but parking structure could easily cost $20 or $30 million. And it's heartburn for them to think about how much parking and driving has changed in the last 5 years with Uber and autonomous vehicles. So many of them are struggling at making that huge capital investment into a parking structure, knowing that there's a potential that that whole industry could get disrupted in the next 15 or 20 or 30 years that you would probably say would be the life cycle of a parking garage. And then, wrapping up, just looking at what we see as been the most positive, which again is a multifamily downtown, because it does allow for that foundation to build on everything else. And so where we are today, there's 3,100 total units of multifamily in downtown Columbus. Looking at that, there's been 998 that's been delivered since 2013. There's another 1,400 that are under construction right now. And there's another 700 units that are being proposed. So we continue to see more and more multifamily. And the good news is that that's really going to impact all assets, all types of real estate in Columbus, because you're going to see more office because you'll have more people downtown. You'll see more retail because more people are going to be living downtown. And again, it'll impact potentially even infrastructure as more and more people are living downtown 24/7. So in conclusion, we covered 5 major trends. The first being influx of global capital. Second being the war for talent and how that's impacting real estate. 3 is the rise of this instant gratification among the consumer. 4 is mixed use. And then 5 is how all of this is impacting this downtown momentum we're seeing here in Columbus. And with that, I'm concluded, and I'm happy to field any questions from the audience. Yes?
A couple areas you didn't touch on when you hear your comments is Gay and High and the Far West Side. What kind of things happening there?
So Gay and High, there's a lot of things. Okay, so the question was things happening at Gay and High and then the Far West Side. I would say from a positive standpoint, probably more things happening at Gay and High than the Far West Side, right? I think the feeling is nobody really knows what's going on with the Far West Side today. But in the same sense, we are seeing an interest in multifamily development out there, and also some of the properties that are trading. We would say that that's probably because the pricing of the apartments or multifamily is at a number where it's attracting the people in that area. The product seems to be decent enough that people are moving into that particular area for the multifamily. And then we also look at where some of the distribution centers are and where some of the potential employers are. So I think what's interesting in looking on the west side is that it probably is going to have a multifamily base in its resurgence. And then, Gay and High, certainly looking at same thing, multifamily. I would imagine you're going to see retail along with that multifamily. There's been some plans for office, mostly from an access standpoint, probably not as as desirable from a high-rise office tower as it would be for something like multifamily or for retail.
There's a big hole in the ground.
Yeah, so listen, multifamily. So Edwards is, I think, actually has 2 projects there that are going to be a mix of multifamily, parking, and then also retail. Judy.
Yes. I've worked with Michael. He's a good guy, so just want to say Mike. I want to ask about the foreign investments coming in. So I guess in the history, I remember when the Japanese came in and bought a lot of real estate back in a while back. So I'm just looking at kind of what do you see going out, I don't know, 5-10 years, what's the effect of that, and how do we, and what had happened in the history of things, and what do you project happening in the future?
I think so the question was looking at historic foreign investment and then trying to project where it's going to be in the future. I think it's going to continue so long as we are seen as a overall stable environment. The entire world is chasing a yield, and we're one of the few places where they can earn a yield in a safe environment. In addition to that, there are a lot of investors that are frankly just placing their funds in here so they just don't lose their money. And so they'll park $100 million, $500 million into a commercial asset just so they don't lose 10 or 20%, or so they, whatever foreign government they are underneath doesn't tax it or take it. So I think so long as we are in a place where we're stable and still offer some growth, that's going to continue.
I just saw Denver adding light rail to take away some of their huge commute issues. And, you addressed the parking issue. Any insight on that?
So light rail would be great. So that was a question. Was like, what's Denver's doing it? Other places have infrastructure, and I would tell you that I think our company feels that places that have really good infrastructure will be ones that are successful in the future because infrastructure is going to be increasingly more important. From my perspective, and this is just Mike Copella speaking, I would say that I don't see the opportunity to do light rail here, and I also think Columbus, everything we hear, all the business leaders we talk about are just all behind this smart city and autonomous vehicles. I think also from a real estate perspective, I don't know how you would implement light rail and just eminent domain issues and just slowly taking back all of that ground. I think it'd be a huge challenge to do. Now, if we had ways to bring people into the city, I think the city probably would be, growing at a faster clip than it is today. But I also think there's some Midwestern things that we just have to figure out ourselves is like, do we want to give up our cars? And I don't know if that demand is just there yet. So I am hopeful that the advancements that we make as a city and with Smart City help solve some of those challenges that we're having. And I do think we'll probably get a little bit smarter with how we park downtown. And I think we probably will see some parking infrastructure have to be built to meet the short-term needs. Yes.
Why isn't the adoption of CODA happening more rapidly?
That's good. So the question was, why isn't the adoption of CODA happening more rapidly? I'd come back to just like us being a Midwestern city that are just relying on cars. And I think until there's a point where it just doesn't make sense to drive, people will continue to drive. And it does come into how some of the amenities are laid in around the city, right? Where for a long time, like I moved here 11 years ago and they said, hey, you can get anywhere in 15 minutes, right? So we just kind of looked at the city as our entire backyard. You can go anywhere. I think we'll have to probably change from that a little bit and look at having, amenities maybe closer to where everybody resides, which kind of goes back to as these retailers look to move closer and closer to their consumers. So I've ridden CODA. I think they're doing tremendous work. I think ultimately we probably have to look in the mirror each morning and say, why am I not taking the bus, right? I mean, I think there's some things there that we probably have to get over just as a city. Yes?
How does a developer make a long-term decision in selling, leasing, or renting a piece of real estate? Because I see so much confusing things right now with the lease market.
So, there's certainly risk out there, but most of them still feel like that real estate is where they want to be placing their time, energy, and investment, mostly because they still feel like they can be in control of it to a point. We're not seeing a lot of speculative development, and we are seeing some in the industrial market, but the demand is fairly high. And in fact, in the industrial market, a lot of these investors are not even putting debt on these buildings. They're just putting up a $20 or $30 million facility all cash. And this comes back to this idea that there's just so much capital on the sidelines. And so they will park it into a building and not put any debt on it, and with the idea that they will refinance it out when they get that particular tenant. So I would say that there's concern across the board with some of the changing fundamentals, but these developers also, that's how they make their money. If they don't develop, then they're not making any money. So they're still going out trying to do things there differently. But that's also why this mixed-use development and finding the right site is becoming more and more important as they look into bring in all of those different amenities. There's really nothing today that's probably more attractive in an office tenant's eye than amenities, and being able to use that area or those amenities to help that employer tell a story.
You mentioned the instant gratification generation.
Correct.
It would seem that there's nothing more instantly gratifying than retail. Yet the current thinking is retail might be waning. What's your prediction, or what's the prediction as of 11 o'clock this morning on retail?
So I don't think retail is waning. I think it's just going to be, so the question was, is retail waning? Where's the future of retail? I don't think retail is waning, but I do think it's going to be different in 10 years than it is today and was 10 years ago. I'd say local retailers and even national retailers are look at really changing the grouping of people that they have in a center. So it might be now a healthcare use, might be a bank, a restaurant. So kind of getting back to having all of the things in your backyard that you technically need to have. And so those sites are going to be governed by not necessarily all the things that you can buy online, but a mix of things that you can buy online, and then some things that you probably need to go actually be in person to go do. And so I think retail will be seen very different today in 10 years, but there still will be retail places. We still see retail as an experience, and so people are going to go, and maybe they had a bad day and they got to go buy a dress. I know my wife does that all the time. Maybe you just want to go in and get a nice experience at Starbucks, right, and just sit there and enjoy a cup of coffee. That part, in our mind, is not going to change, but we think the mix of that's going to change. And the thinking really actually is that you will see one of the large online retailers buy out like a JCPenney's, a Sears, or somebody like that, mostly to get their real estate. And this comes with this idea that they're going to do it to be closer to the consumer. And so, again, my thought there is that, if it's a 100,000 square foot facility, you're not going to have 100,000 square feet devoted towards retail. You might see the front end of that store devoted towards retail or that experience, and then the back portion of that is where they're going to be shipping all of those goods. And so when you press that buy button, you'll have the opportunity to, wait an hour or two for it to come to your office or home, or you can go pick it up and try it on. But I do think you'll see those online retailers find ways to kind of come closer and they'll look for the retailers that have a good overall retail footprint from a brick and mortar standpoint.
You mentioned that I think Canada was a major source of foreign investment.
Yes.
What are some other countries?
So really we're seeing, Canada, China, Japan, Norway, Germany, those are all, so the question was, what other countries are investing in the United States? Really, it's all across the board. We just see China and Canada as probably the two major investors right now. And the Canadian influx was mostly due to their changes in currency. So we saw actually a tremendous amount of Canadian investment. We saw a lot in Columbus because they could take advantage of the currency exchange. So with their valuation of their dollar versus ours, it benefited them to be able to take the money that they had in Canada and then come here and buy real estate. And then,
Any from Russia?
yeah, without doubt. We are seeing foreign investment here in Columbus, but what's happening is that investment's coming in to really the major markets. So, if you're in Russia and you have $500 million that you're going to place, you're probably going to go to Chicago, New York, Dallas, one of the major markets. What that does, though, is it prices out that investor that used to play there. Now they're saying, well, shoot, I can't buy what I normally would want in Dallas or California or wherever. I have to go find another market. And they really like the fundamentals in Columbus. So that's where we're seeing it. So we don't see it. We haven't seen a tremendous amount of foreign investment here, but we're seeing the repercussions of it without a doubt. Question in the back.
You talk about market cycle, where you think we are and what indicators you look for change.
Company-wise, I would tell you that kind of feel like we're in the 7th or 8th inning of the market cycle. Columbus feels different than that. It feels like maybe we're in the 4th or 5th inning. And when I talk to our head research people, they always talk about that even during the downturn, Columbus still saw some growth. It just didn't see a lot of growth. And we work with companies that are constantly looking at different markets, and they love what's going on in Columbus. So I'm hopeful we'll continue to see more and more announcements of companies coming into Columbus, for headquarters or for an extension of their operation.
These people who are living downtown do for recreation, or where do they go for?
So from my perspective, I lived in the German Village for 10 years. So I was down there for a long time. Had a baby down there, and then did the suburban trot once we've thought about schools and all that good stuff. But there's tons of stuff to do downtown. I think if you look at the Columbus Commons, which is close to where our office is, there's yoga out in the park, kickball, food trucks. They play movies out there. There's a concert really every single night. So there's a tremendous amount of things to do downtown. I think it's different than probably what people think about what it can be downtown or what it was for them back in the past. But it's also they just opened a bowling alley on 4th. I mean, I never would have thought that would be possible. And it's from all kinds. I haven't been there yet, but I know my staff's tried to go 2 or 3 times and they can't get in. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening downtown to meet the needs of a lot of the new residents.
When you talk specifically about traffic patterns and the ability to get employers to take a lot of this office space downtown, it took me 20 minutes I live in German Village, 20 minutes to come up High Street to get here, all because of the buses, okay, on High Street. Secondly, when I come into downtown around 5 o'clock on South 4th, behind the convention center, it takes 20 minutes. 20 minutes to go 7 blocks. When are the police going to have cops? When is the city going to consider something like a rail line and get the buses and get all the cars off of High Street, charge the high state students $50 a year and their dues to have transportation from Doddridge all the way down to German Village, and put a light rail through there like they have in Delft and Amsterdam, okay? Because we've got a lot of problems. You add another 2,200 units like you're projecting, and people are going to get disgusted with the traffic pattern in downtown Columbus, I'm telling you.
Yeah, and so I probably don't need to hear it repeated. You guys heard it. I would say that, right? So I lived downtown, so I remember, 2005 buzzing up and down 3rd and Front Street, and you could get anywhere in the city in literally minutes. But this does come to, I don't think we'll see light rail, unfortunately, or a trolley down. I mean, it'd be fun if I was wrong, but I do think this is where, just as a city, we probably have to grow up and recognize that, hey, for us to take that next step as a city, we're going to have those longer drive times. It's going to be a little bit more difficult just to do the things that we used to do. And I just think that's where we're going as a city. I'm not saying that I like it, right? I used to love being able to buzz up and down and get around, not have to wait for the buses. But I think as we grow as a city and we get more people downtown, you'll see probably longer times. But it does come back to this autonomous vehicle piece and this whole idea that you can get people around without needing a car. And if all of those things kind of come together, I do think that that will actually lessen the burden on the infrastructure, which might make it easier to get around. And then you can talk about converting some of these parking garages into other things. But that's probably down the road. But unfortunately, I don't think we'll see those. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Anderson. I 100% appreciate your outrage, because I was at the big table not long ago, and everyone was talking about we're doing this, we're doing that. It was right after the transportation announcement came out, but no one would say out loud, we have a huge parking problem. Because I'm in the production business, so like a lot of other people in this town, we thrive on businesses coming in town, and we work in a lot of other states and venues, so we understand what it takes to work. And it's like, not only is parking not getting better, it's getting worse. And so if you're trying to convince somebody to bring 6,000, 20,000 people into Columbus, and they want to go because they sure are going to Indianapolis, they get it, but we can't park them.
Well, I still think we're just used to the way that it was. And I do think that we have some parking challenges. And, what I'll say that we work closely with the city when we're bringing in, new companies. That being said, we still feel like we're very attractive when you look at all the things. And parking is still available. It's just different than what it was a couple years ago. But I understand that it's a challenge. But I also, if I was a private investor, would it make sense to build a new garage today? I think there's certainly appetite there, but there's also a lot of new technology that's out there that's changing the way that people drive. And at some point, if you look at how many times you might use your car in a day, for somebody that drives back and forth to downtown, and the fact that they, let's say they're leasing it, paying $400 or $500 a month, and then they pay their insurance, their gas, and it sits in the garage all day long. There's lots of thought around, what if we just all shared cars? So I'm going off real estate there, but in the same sense, those are some of the ways of thinking that are impacting real estate, and parking is one of them. It's certainly a need, but believe me, when we stack up against Indy, we kick their butt.
One more question right there.
We have this problem here in Columbus that there's a small group of bicycling enthusiasts that cost us to lose 30, 40, 50% of our lane miles in the area downtown. They're going to take them out on High Street, which is already a wreck, and they're going to make it worse. And, have these big negative impacts just to placate these people who think that people are going to ride bikes in the middle of winter. It's proven not to be the case. Nobody uses the lanes. What do we got to do to get the city to get us back that traffic? Because that's probably the main reason.
Yeah, I don't think it's coming back. And I'm same thing too. I'm with you. And I apparently I should just come for like every 60 days for like a venting session where people can talk about all of the stuff, which I get it. Right? I drive into downtown, so I'm, like, why is that guy on the bike in that lane when that could be, 100 cars? And I understand it, but I also look at when we compare ourselves to cities, or when we look at cities where we want to go, we are mimicking or trying to get ahead of all the things that they're doing to make themselves a city where people want to live, work, and play, which is a healthy city, right? So unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to change. I think you'll see, more of that, unfortunately, which I do think it'll make it, for the person driving a car, it'll make it more difficult to maybe get into downtown. But it's also where you see the popularity of the suburbs right around the city, the Arlington, the Grandview, the Bexleys. Those are areas that are going to continue to grow really well, mostly because of their proximity to the city. Because people don't want to drive 40 minutes to get into town and then spend 20 minutes to go. But if you look at where the growth is going to continue to happen, Columbus has those right fundamentals. I just think that, really probably we as a people just have to recognize that if we're going to grow and do all the things that we want to do, it's probably going to get a little bit more difficult. Our way of life is probably not going to be, from a real estate standpoint, our way of life probably is going to be a little bit more difficult for us to take that next step.
Michael, thank you very much. Michael, as you can tell from the energy in this group,
yeah.
our middle initials are bullish on. So we're Rotary bullish on Columbus. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Appreciate the opportunity.
And everyone, have a great week. We'll see you 2 weeks from today.